Funding for Current Conversations is provided by University of Oklahoma President's Office, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Our show today is a preview of our upcoming season, which is going to be among our best. We'll talk to actor and activist Danny Glover, legendary union organizer Dolores Huerta, indigenous photographer Monique Wilbur, and several movers and shakers who are a big part of what is happening across America and in the world. In this first segment, we'll talk to Dolores Huerta, who is a shaper of Mexican American and union history in America. Enjoy this conversation. If I can take you backward just a second, I think you met Cesar Chavez in a community service organization in the 60s. What were the aspirations that you and he had at that point? What did you think you were doing at the time?
Well, our purpose was to organize people in their own communities so that they could go forward and help, erase some of this discrimination that was going on. And not only in their own communities, like, fighting school issues, racism issues in the community, but also to start dealing at the state and national level. I remember we were very active in passing laws to get ballots in the Spanish language in California, to get driver's licenses in people's ethnic language. We passed a very important law way back in 1961 to remove the citizenship requirement so that people could get public assistance. Later on, with United Farm Workers, we passed unemployment insurance for farm workers, the right to organize. So we worked at the local level to strengthen communities so that they could then influence their legislators and their congresspeople, right? So that we could, we passed a law, when you think about this, to make it mandatory that employers throughout the United States have toilets in the fields for their workers, which they didn't have.
These were big gains.
Yeah, but it was all done with the workers themselves organizing and putting pressure on their legislators to make these things happen.
Was there ever a moment where you and Cesar realized this could be transformative? We could be changing the culture of the United States. This could have huge implications, or were you just so busy changing the world around you, you didn't need to reflect? Which was it?
I think we were, just trying to get people organized, getting them involved, making them understand that they had the power to make changes. And that's what our purpose was. I don't think we were thinking of ourselves in any kind of a historical context. I think other people that were working with us could see that, but we were just so busy organizing that wasn't one of our thoughts.
Yeah, because now I think of you as somebody who's walked on the stage of history and has made really big things happen. What was Cesar Chavez like? What was it like to work with him? You were the co-leaders of the United Farm Workers.
Well, Cesar was a very humble person. He didn't really like a lot of attention. He was embarrassed by it. When people would shout, "Viva Chavez," he would just cringe, He just wasn't used to that. And because he felt that, a lot of the credit belonged to the workers that were doing the work. And, they were the ones that were making things happen. And so he was very humble in that respect. Really followed Gandhi, the precepts of Gandhi, the whole idea of voluntary poverty, the idea of nonviolence, and of course he committed his life to doing that with his, in a very physical way by the long fast that he did.
The fast that he did?
Yeah, he did 3 fasts. He did the first one in 1968 for 25 days, and then in Arizona for 72 days, another water-only fast, and then the last one was for 36 days.
Those probably destroyed his health, don't you think?
Well, that's hard to say because Cesar actually was not ill when he passed away. He died in his sleep, and it was a very natural death. And the interesting thing about, because his parents lived to be almost 100 years old. His dad was 101, and his mother was just a couple of years short of 100. But his grandfather, who Cesar was built like, died at exactly the same age as Cesar, 66 years old.
Dr. Amir Almut deals with diversity issues at the University of Massachusetts. In this segment, he's going to talk about some of the challenges of responding to Islamophobia in America.
Islamophobia is a lot older than people realize. It really goes back to the Crusades. It goes back to the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain, and the impact that had on the rationale around colonialism and the sense of superiority of European and white colonizers in various parts of the world, including the Islamic world. But then as we move into kind of modern times, the late 20th century, early 21st century American society, we have immigration of people from all different parts of the world, many of whom are Muslim or many of whom are perceived as Muslim, and a sense of exotification, a sense of resistance, a rejection of the foreign other. And that was also happening alongside increases in Islam amongst African Americans. Islam really being something associating with Africa for many African Americans, reclaiming identity prior to slavery, and resisting oppression and so forth. And so we have a very diverse society, but overwhelmingly we're perceived as people of color and non-white. And that might not always be true, but that's how we're perceived. And so we experience a racialized dynamic in this country. And then with 9/11, all of that has been exacerbated.
But before we talk about post 9/11, all of what you're talking about, doesn't it go under that very large umbrella of Orientalism? And I just mention that because it's a huge umbrella, and there's reinforcement in the West from a lot of different directions to see Middle Eastern people as kind of bloodthirsty and outside of cultural renegades in some way, overly passionate.
Absolutely. In my talks, I always say everybody must read Orientalism by Edward Said, to learn and understand that distorted lens that Europe has had towards Eastern cultures, particularly Arab cultures. But, it's also the conflating. My family's from India, originally. And, we all kind of get grouped together. And, Islamophobia tremendously affects the Sikh community, which is a different religious group that originates from India, and the men wear turbans because they don't cut their hair. And ironically, most Muslims don't wear turbans, but they get perceived to be Muslim, and as a community, they're subjected as a proportion to more hate crimes than any community in this country.
It almost seems like a matter of sort of dark humor that all these people are being grouped into one stereotype, and the fit is not good at all. It makes no sense whatsoever.
You might remember a couple years back, the Miss America winner was the first South Asian American that ever won. She was actually one of my former students from University of Michigan, and she was bombarded with all these tweets saying that the Arab won and the terrorists have won and a Muslim won, and she's actually a Hindu American, but because she's brown, she's just grouped in with this, this foreign other Muslim threat, perceived Muslim threat that's, taking over America, supposedly imposing Sharia law and so forth. And so, yeah, there's a belligerence to it.
Now, I have a feeling that you're going to say that after 9/11, all this gets amped up, right?
Yeah. I think for me, it's best to speak from my own experience. I think, before 9/11, it was, there was a curiosity, there was a foreign otherness, there was a general experience of being a person of color and not white. But then, after 9/11, the intensity and the scrutiny, but before 9/11, a lot of people used to say, what's a Muslim? Like, a lot of people didn't even know what a Muslim was.
In this segment, we're going to speak with Monique Wilbur. She is an indigenous photographer who has embarked on an ambitious project of photographing people from each of the 567 recognized tribes in America.
I hear the argument that social justice or inequality is a thing of the past. We have integration. We have, we're all created equal. It's government for the people. It's important to recognize that for the people was not for the people, the Black people, for the people, the Indian people. It was for the white people, the ones that were legal to vote, the ones that were considered people. And if we really want to know, if we want to take an honest look at equity in this country, all we have to do is look at body count. And this is a very visceral experience. It's perpetuating itself in the bodies, the safety of our bodies. 3 out of 4 Native women experience sexual assault or domestic violence in their lifetime. For many of us, it's not a question of if, but rather a question of when. Across the border in Canada, we have an estimated 1,200 stolen sisters. Our children are at the highest rate for suicide in the country. Only 50% of our students are graduating from high school. We don't have the resources that we need to sustain our communities. And so I don't think that the argument needs to be made whether or not things are equitable. I think one thing that we could all learn from is that it is in the acknowledgement that we are on indigenous land. Right now, where we're sitting right now, we're in Ohlone territory. There's an indigenous history of this place. And we would all be better if we learned from that. And I offer those lessons through images. Others offer it through books. Others offer through curricula. The information is available. And I do believe that if we want to break down borders and invisible lines between us, and we want things to change, we have to get to know one another. We break bread. We become friends. We reach across and we say, look, I got you. You are not alone. I'll take care of you. What do you need? This is what I can do. And when we do that with one another, one relationship at a time, we build community. And we no longer are afraid of one another, and the differences between us and the color of our skin suddenly doesn't look so much different. But that only happens when we have true connectivity. And so that, to me, is what I'm hoping for.
In this segment, we're going to talk to Danny Glover. People know him as an actor in over 100 films, from Lethal Weapon to The Color Purple, but many people don't know him as a social activist. Enjoy this discussion.
I've always had a capacity. I've always had what I consider really good work ethics, except when I was studying in school. But going to get a job, making a living, I've done something like that in a very absolutely wonderful family setting, my mother and father and siblings, from the time I was 11, 12 years old, and then because my parents were great, were hard workers and everything else, and they found, whether it was work around the house or whatever the work they found that we did, it was work that was meaningful, or that you felt as if they were chores, yes, but it was a contribution to family life. So in that sense, the work was the first. I mean, it's not saying that I wanted to do it anymore, but inherently, or subconsciously, I just felt in my own child's mind, there was a contribution to that. So I knew I could find that into work. The fact is that I found something and landed on something that I felt was bigger than me. And I always say that, I always tell people that what was important to me, and those people want to be an actor or an actress, I said, make it larger than yourself. Make it more important to yourself. I remember when I began to do Fugard, and I'd seen a book by Ernest Cole.
So you started on the stage with Fugard.
Started on stage Fugard. I started on stage with other things, but Fugard was my really entree into the second phase of what I considered to be the beginning of a career. And I had a book by Ernest Cole. I didn't even know Ernest Cole, but he smuggled out of South Africa an enormous amount of photographs depicting the system of apartheid. It's called House of Bondage, 1962, 63, whatever, House of Bondage, 27 years old. House of Bondage. And that became my kind of like Bible without the looking the picture itself and the work itself. So I felt that what I was doing had a much larger value than myself. And how much of that contributed to my own growth and maturation, maybe a great deal of that. But I think that was the first instance. And as a way that I needed that kind of foundation or pretext for me to even get in acting.
You are so involved in causes outside of the film industry. You are truly a social activist. These aren't, you don't do lip service. You go out there and really you've given so many causes over the years, your time and your talent. How do your fans react to that? Do they kind of keep a separation? There's Danny Glover on the screen and there's Danny Glover, the activist?
I don't know how they really respond to that. Some of them will come up to me. More often, they'll say that I like your work as an actor, and on many occasions, people say I like your work as an actor, but I especially like your work as an activist.
Dr. Roksana Ali is an expert on human trafficking and Iranian culture. In this segment, we're going to talk to her about some of the challenges of being a minority educator.
I don't expect people to be blind, race blind, or say, I'm colorblind. Because if you're colorblind, then you don't see more than half the population in some places. So, or I would say the world probably. But I think people should just acknowledge that people come and I love them, get to know the persons instead of their stereotypes or the culture. Or because, for example, I don't identify as Muslim, but I've been in colleagues' communities where people ask me, "Oh, are you finding something to eat?" And I was trying to figure out how this person knew I was a vegetarian. And then I come to find that thinking I'm looking for something halal or appropriately Muslim treated food. I don't know how to also put it, food. So, I think those are the kinds of stereotypes that I bring with myself in a place that I walk in. And I would kind of like to be known as a person. John Rawls talks about, he's a political philosopher, talks about like the basis social respect. And I think that's a kind of what I would hope for every single person in the community and the world, really. It's an asset that a lot of us who may or may not have, or I should say probably don't have, take for, let me just rephrase this. Those of us who have it take for granted. Or those of us who don't, that's just like the most basic thing, I think, to have. Just recognize that people are different, but at the same time, people are people.
Especially in an age of globalization, that is the future. It seems to me there's a kind of urgency here. Americans are very isolated, a little xenophobic, kind of afraid of just cultures unlike their own. There's a really important issue. Something positive needs to happen. They need to break out of that xenophobia, right?
Well, yes, but at the same time, I think there are some kinds of things like the government can do. There are kinds of things the media, just about the time, we've been over 30 years from Iran hostage crisis. Just about the time that a whole generation of children are born, both here and in Iran, and a second generation of Iranians have grown and gone into public and have gotten jobs. We're starting to get to know more and more Iranian people. Argo comes out. So it's a kind of like, oh, but see, these are not those people. So it seems like, the way I see it is like the background of my identity is Iran hostage crisis. And just when I feel like we could move on, like movies like Argo comes out, that is just a kind of like almost confining again. And it gives a whole new generation of people. Whether or not it's some parts of it are Hollywood, some not, but at the same time, it's just that puts the crazy people in the kind of the back of people's minds, I think, all over. And I think those are the kinds of things that somewhat irresponsible, socially irresponsible in this kinds of climate to bring these back to the front of a whole new generation of Americans when they don't have another story about us. That's the only story they're getting.
In this segment, Chris Salinas talks about the challenges of minorities going through higher education.
I study the socialization of Latino male faculty in academia, And one of the few of the arguments that I make, but also supported by the literature, it talks about how having someone that looks like you, that sounds like you, that have similar social identities, and that you're able to relate with that individual, you're more likely to be successful. I also have I have the argument, and based on literature review as well, that the most powerful role model that anyone can have is an educator, because the student is with the individual, right? Now, when we speak about faculty at the university level, it's a different type of thinking, limited hours, but the impact is still the same as if the educator wasn't the student and the educator were in the K-12 system. So when we translate that to higher education, meeting with our faculty, it's still the same impact because faculty are making an impact on students. So it is important to continue to have Latino, Latinas in higher education as faculty. Now, we need to look at the trends of our data, our numbers, and I'm gonna go a little bit back because that's the numbers that I have. First, in the cohort of 2011 and 12, out of all the earned PhDs in the United States, there were 5,000 Latinas and about 4,000 Latinos. And then I break that down by field. And in the field of education, there was only 423, I believe, Latinas and 220 Latinos that earned a PhD in education in 1 year. That's very problematic because that's less than 1% out of all the PhDs that were given in the United States. So when we translate that into what does it look like in the classroom, that doesn't mean that everyone that earns a PhD or a EDD or doctorate degree are going back into the classroom. Many of them are going to be practitioners as they didn't have a positive experience in their doctorate degree. So they go and do other things, policy or be a practitioner within the field.
You make the really compelling case, sort of with an exclamation point. Yes, there need to be more Latino teachers and professors. Why aren't there? I mean, if it's just self-evident, make that change, we're gonna get results that we like better. I've even noticed in some Hispanic serving institutions where there are a lot of Latino students, 60 and 80%, often there aren't that many Latino teachers and professors.
So, I mean, there's a lot of, it's a long discussion, a long conversation that we could have, but one of the things that I think about, or what I have discovered in my research is that, well, I haven't discovered, I think it's been out there, right? But what I learned through that process, but also understanding my own experiences. We are rejected, and we have been rejected, but we continue to be rejected by higher education, right? And I make the argument, for example, if we really want to make a change in our communities, we need to start publishing it in Spanish or in other languages in order to meet the needs of these communities. But so I go back to the idea of our Latinos or Latinas, right? In higher education, why are they not continuing in the graduate pathway? It is because often literature tells us and research tells us that it is because oftentimes they do not have the support, they do not know the system, how to navigate that. The other thing is financial aid, comes out a lot in the literature review. I think men and females have different experiences throughout this process, but also oftentimes familia plays a significant role.
Dr. Shakti Butler is an independent filmmaker. And in this segment, we'll talk about racism and white privilege in America.
Let's just talk about, the Black codes, for example. So after the end of slavery, there was still a need for cheap labor. And so many, many laws were passed in order to pick people up for things like vagrancy, drinking too much, going after maybe white women or whatever it might be, that they could be arrested for, convicted, and then sold back to someone who needed their services.
The prisons would contract the labor out.
It was contract labor. And so even when we talk about stop and search, that's nothing new. The right to control the physical space of a body based upon the economic needs for that labor, that's just continuing on. What we're seeing in the prison pipeline, however, is not just about the children, it's about their families. It's about generational harm that has been done over and over and over again and created patterns that then become how we stay impoverished, or how we stay uneducated, or how we stay traumatized by how it is that we're treated as human beings.
I think a lot of us had a kind of naive notion that with the election of Barack Obama, there would be a new era of openness and some racism would fall away. And it seems like, if anything, it's been intensified and uglier through the 8 years of his presidency. Has it gotten worse? Is it, or is it just that people feel emboldened?
I think people are terrified. White people are terrified. And I say that as a general category because I personally refer to it as the dying breath of the dragon, so to speak. We need to move on. And what happens by move on, I mean become a more equitable society. I think that with the changing demographics, white people have a fear that is stirred by the press, by popular conversation, that says you are being threatened and your way of life is being threatened. When that happens and people are acting out of fear, how they really feel comes to the surface. And so this way that Barack Obama, for example, can't even talk about race without being called that he's using the race card, but people heap all kinds of disrespect on him, this has been going on all along. And it doesn't override the fact that he's the president of the United States, how people really feel about the other. And this consistent effort to make him other is how you then rationalize your behavior.
Thank you for being with us for this preview of our upcoming season. Join us next time for more current conversation, Sundays at 1 o'clock. Thank you for watching.